Today, we are diving into a century-old mystery. But this isn't just about a woman who vanished. This is an explainer on the incredible modern detective work it took to find her. We're going to trace the breadcrumbs, the ones hidden in public records, that let researchers piece together a life that was first sensationalized and then almost completely erased. So, let's get into it.
Okay, so every good investigation has to start with what we thought we knew. We have to begin where the legend of the hidden woman started, with a story that literally made national headlines, and then just went completely cold.
I mean, that quote right there just says it all, doesn't it? It's the whole enigma of Adelaide Branch. How does someone who is at the center of a media firestorm just end up in an unmarked grave, with her real story untold for more than 100 years?
So this right here is the moment that lit the fuse on the whole scandal. When Melvin Couch, who was a really prominent guy, dies suddenly of a heart attack, the world discovers Adelaide Branch. Turns out she'd been living in a hidden room at his office, and she wasn't just his companion, she was basically his personal caregiver, tending to this chronic leg wound he'd had since he was a teenager.
Now this really just scratches the surface. To really get why she disappeared, you need a little more context. We're talking about a complex 15-year relationship here. And that huge Monticello fire in 1909, that was a massive turning point. It made Couch's injury way worse, which meant Adelaide's caregiving was absolutely essential. The building she was in was destroyed, and when it was rebuilt, she moved right back into a similar hidden spot. Then, after the scandal in 1913, poof, she just vanishes from history.
And for over 100 years, that's pretty much where her story ended. But here's where things get really interesting. Modern research methods can turn a cold case hot again, and the key, it turns out, isn't to look for where a person went, but to find where their life ended. Let's follow that first clue.
That really is the central question, isn't it? When the paper trail runs dry and people change their names, where in the world do you even begin? Well, the answer is, you have to work backwards.
And this document right here, this is the first huge break in the case. Instead of searching for Adelaide Branch in 1914, researcher Tom Rue started looking for her death. This is the 1948 death certificate for a woman named Mary Douglas. Now, at first glance, it doesn't seem connected at all, but the details on it, they were everything.
Okay, so what made this random death certificate so important? It all comes down to these key details. Look at the names of her parents, William Branch and Elizabeth Bundy. A little bit of genealogical research confirms those were, in fact, Adelaide Branch's parents. And then there's the informant, the James N. Jarvie Commonwealth Service. We're going to get back to them in a second, but that was another massive clue. This one single document connected the hidden woman to a whole new name and, finally, a place of rest.
Right, so that informant, the Jarvie Commonwealth Service, that was the key that was going to unlock the door to all those lost decades and finally reveal the truth of her life after the scandal.
This document you're looking at is basically the Rosetta Stone of this whole investigation. In 2025, the researchers sent an inquiry, and the Jarvie Service released their case file on Mary Douglas. And inside, it contained her entire story, a lot of it in her own words, that she had told them when she applied for their help in her later years.
And boom, just like that, the official record confirms the connection. Mary Douglas of New York City was born in Hartwick, the exact same small town as Adelaide Branch, with the exact same family background. The pieces were all starting to fall into place, and it was all because they followed that one single name on a death certificate.
Remember the informant on the death certificate? Well, to get why that was such a critical clue, you have to understand who the Jarvie Service was. They provided support to what they called gentlefolk, educated people who had fallen on hard times. And their vetting process was incredibly thorough, which means they ended up creating a detailed biography of Mary Douglas, a biography that otherwise would have been completely lost to time. So the information from those Jarvie files led the researcher directly to this very spot, her final resting place in Kensico Cemetery in Valhalla. The mystery of what happened to Adelaide Branch was finally solved. She had died as Mary Douglas and was buried here, in a plot specifically for people the Jarvie Service had helped.
So now that her final location was known, those Jarvie files, plus other genealogical tools like census data, could be used to fill in that huge gap between 1914 and 1948 and reveal the life she actually built for herself.
So how did she manage to just vanish without a trace? Well, she moved to the biggest city in the country, New York, and completely reinvented herself. Adelaide Branch, the woman from the headlines, was gone, and in her place, a new identity emerged, Mary Douglas. And you know what? It was a completely different life. She settled in Morningside Heights, right near Columbia University, and built a whole career as an independent writer and researcher. Far from being a hidden woman, she was an active intellectual contractor, working with university professors like Walter Rautenstrauch and authors like Gertrude Ogden Tubby. The Jarvie records even showed she spent time living in Washington, D.C., which was later confirmed by the 1940 census.
So her new life in New York was a complete 180. But you might be wondering, how can we be absolutely sure that Mary Douglas and Adelaide Branch are the same person? Well, let's connect the dots using the trails she left in all those public records.
Okay, this is so cool. Check this out. On the left, you've got the 1880 U.S. Census showing her as a little kid, Mary A. Branch. Then, on the right, 40 years later, the 1920 U.S. Census shows her new identity, Mary Douglas, a writer living on her own in Manhattan. It's the same person, captured at two totally different points in a life of extraordinary change, all documented in the public record. This timeline just lays out her whole journey perfectly. She was born Mary A. Branch. By 1900, she's showing up in the census as Adelia, which eventually became the Adelaide the newspapers ran with. Then, after all that, she disappears and comes back as Marie, and finally Mary Douglas. Each census record is like a footprint, letting researchers follow her path and prove without any doubt that this was all the same woman. It's just a masterclass in using data to rebuild a hidden life.
So why does uncovering this one forgotten life matter so much more than a century later? What's the bigger picture here? What's the significance of this kind of historical detective work?
Well, here's the thing. The story of the hidden woman was a caricature. It was created by early 20th century yellow journalism. They sold a sensational story, but they erased the real person. This research gives her back her humanity, her career, and the full, complex story of her life. A life of independence and intellect that completely defied the label they stuck on her.
And this isn't just us looking back with 21st century eyes. Even at the time, people like the great author Upton Sinclair recognized how unjust it was. He actually featured her case in his book on media ethics, using her story as a perfect example of why journalism needed to change. He didn't see a headline, he saw a person who had been totally exploited by a sensationalist press.
And that really leaves us with this one final thought. The records that solved this whole mystery, a death certificate, a charity's case file, old census pages, they weren't buried treasure. They were just public records, hiding in plain sight. It just took the right kind of research to connect them. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Whose story will be uncovered next?